I'm humbled to be the opening speaker for this webinar series, so thank you very much for that. No pressure. The whole series lives or dies with me. I know. Just kidding. So I do love that it's a buggy series for this coming year. You'll be able to see, I think, through my talk that I like bugs. So today, basically, we're going to talk about the good guys and girls, and so beneficial insects in the garden and in the landscape. And just wondering, anybody know what this insect I have up here is? You can put it in the chat if you do know what it is. See, this is me, right? You think it's a beneficial insect talk, and the easy thing to do would be to put like a ladybug up there, right? But like everybody does ladybug. Oh, I'm getting some. Yeah, very good. Patty's got bald-faced hornet. That's what it is. So I went with the much maligned and misunderstood bald-faced hornet for the cover of the beneficial insect talk. And we're going to talk about it more during the talk, but I decided to go with that instead of like the cute little ladybug that everybody loves. Don't worry, we'll talk about ladybugs. So kind of just to begin, we're going to jump right into, basically it's like a big parade of insects. So we're going to go over a whole bunch of examples of kind of common groups of beneficial insects that you might find in the landscape. Not necessarily particular species, but more groups of insects, and really arthropods, because we're also going to touch on spiders. So the beneficial insects and arthropods and their relatives. So what makes it a good bug, or why do we decide it's beneficial? These are kind of the couple categories we usually think of. Generally, we're thinking about insects that eat the insects that we don't like, right? So we're thinking about natural enemies of other insects that we've deemed as pests. They're pests because they eat our plants, that we're trying to grow, or they eat our food, or even, they get into the house. We're not going to talk about those today, but generally we think of natural enemies of the insects that we determine to be as bad. And then the other group of beneficial insects that we'll talk about a little bit are pollinators. So I work at the Rutgers Plant Diagnostic Lab. What we do here is we diagnose plant problems for disease and insect pests. So I'm very familiar with the insects that cause problems on plants and the insects that feed on them. I know pollinators, it's just not my day-to-day focus. You have some fantastic webinar speakers coming up where you're going to focus a lot more specifically on pollinators. So we'll touch on them in this talk, but a lot of this is going to be more the natural enemies. But again, pollinators. And the thing about both of these groups of insects are that they both, you can attract them to the landscape in similar ways. So it all goes together. I'm just curious, out of the millions of species of insects on this planet, what percent do you think we consider to be the bad bugs? If you want to throw a couple numbers into the chat, and we'll just see what percentage of the millions of insects that we have, what percentage are considered bad or pests, or we just don't like? All of them. That's a bad answer. I see 50%, 5%, 5%, yeah. Those are good guesses. It's actually, we kind of estimated at about only 3% of the millions and millions of species of insects. 3% of those we consider as problems, towards humans. Either they're pests of our plants, they're pests of us, they're pests of our animals. But that leaves 97% of the millions and millions of species of insects as either beneficial, or more likely they're just sort of, innocent bystanders. Right? If we were doing this live and in person, my first question to the group is usually, how many people like bugs? Usually me and Sue raise our hands, maybe it's a couple other people. But I find a lot of people, don't necessarily like bugs. I'm hoping that because you're watching this webinar, you are bug lovers. So just nod your head. I can't see you, but we'll just pretend you're all bug lovers, or will be by the end. So these are the categories we're going to talk about. And let's break them down a little bit for you. And I can see the chat, so if you have questions while we go, please ask me and I'll do the best I can to kind of incorporate them into the talk. So the first category of natural enemies of the insects that we consider bad are the predators. And the predators, basically, they're the ones that hunt, subdue, and then feed on other insects. So they eat other insects. Generally speaking, they're going to be larger than their prey. That makes sense, right? But not all of them. Some of them are just really good at their jobs and they can feed on insects that are bigger than them. But mostly they're larger than their prey. They consume many prey. They're ravenous, right? So down here, can you guys see my mouse? Down here on the left is a ladybird beetle and it's feeding on an aphid. So you can see it's true, the ladybug or ladybird beetle is larger than the aphid, you know, and ladybugs will eat hundreds and hundreds of aphids through their lifetime, both the ladybug adults and larvae. So they're ravenous. That's true of a lot of the predators. And the other thing is that predators generally feed as both the adults and the immatures, or the nymphs we call them, or the larva, that's another term. So they eat in, you know, they're predatory in both stages. On the right here, we have a predatory stink bug. It's using its piercing, sucking mouth part, right, like a needle, and basically sucking the life out of a caterpillar. So these are predatory insects. Kind of just generalized characteristics about both. Predators are usually fairly mobile. Okay, that's another word for fast. Spiders can be fast. Anybody know what this shiny beetle over here is? So they may be large, conspicuous. I mean, this is, look at conspicuous. Talk about like beautiful and shiny and brightly colored. This is a tiger beetle, so we'll talk about that a little bit more, but they're fast. If anybody's tried to catch a tiger beetle, like let's say you took entomology as an undergraduate and you had to make an insect collection and you had to collect a tiger beetle, and there you are running in the field trying to catch a tiger beetle, they are fast. So they do have to, you know, predators have to catch live insects that are on the move from them. And then the other thing about predators is that a lot of them have a relatively broad host range, right? So we call them generalists. They usually don't just go after one species of, or a couple of species of types of insects. They feed on lots of different things, right? There's something in the chat. Sometimes I'm confused telling the difference between ladybug and similar looking pest beetles. Same for praying mantids. All right, so we will get to examples of those and maybe we can talk about it more when we get to lady beetles and spiders. Look at this adorable little fuzzy spider. Nobody's thinking that, right? I am. Okay. Just an example, a real life example. Nope. Just a real life example of, and we'll talk about more of them, more common ones, but this is a pretty cool thing. In New Jersey, we have, you know, and along the East Coast, we have, we deal with southern pine beetle, especially in the pine barrens. Southern pine beetle attacks pines. This is the larva on the right of the southern pine beetle. This beetle over here on the left, this is a predator. This is a checkered beetle, and this is a beetle that will actually hunt out these southern pine beetles that are in the tree and go after them, feed on them, kill lots of them. And what's really cool is that the way they can find them is that the southern pine beetles, they release chemicals called pheromones. They're called aggregation pheromones. Basically, when a southern pine beetle finds a tree that's good to feed on, it releases these chemicals that tell the other southern pine beetles in the area, hey, this is a good tree, come and feed here. Well, what the checkered beetle has been able to do is that it can also pick up on those aggregation pheromones, and that's how it knows to find its prey. And what's even cooler about this is that we as humans can kind of exploit this relationship in terms of, in the winter, what happens is they go out and they will count in like the state forests. You can go out and through trapping and counting, you compare the ratio of checkered beetles to southern pine beetles. And then depending on that ratio, it gives you an idea of the population density and the damage potential for the following year. So it kind of gives you an idea of what to expect and what's going to need to happen. So that's kind of cool. So I think. Somebody is asking about native versus non-native bugs. So we can talk about that also as we kind of go through this. Are all the insects you're talking about native? So that's kind of not necessarily, because what's happened with global travel of people is that we've moved insects around. So when insects come into places, like for example, if we go back to here, southern pine beetle is actually a native pest. And the checkered beetles are native predators, right? So they're not, so the insects in the talk are not necessarily native versus not native, because it's, at this point, we've moved a lot of insects around just through our global travel and shipping. So I'm not specifically talking about invasives, but we can, if you have a specific question when we get somewhere, I can mention it, or if there's something to say about it, I'll mention it. But so a lot of the insects I am talking about, though, they might not originally be native, but these are ones that you'll commonly find in the landscape, right? Not ones that you have to like go out and buy and put in the landscape. We'll touch on that a little bit, but these are ones that are commonly just found there. Okay, so we talked about predators being the hunters. Parasitoids are different in that they don't feed the same. They don't consume the host the same way. They're generally smaller than the host. Because they're so small, you usually don't even notice them in the landscape. So we want to talk about them because they're kind of like almost the invisible. They're not invisible, but generally I'm very small. Somebody has lost the speaker. Can the rest of you hear me? Hopefully. Have we exported any insects from the US to other countries? Absolutely. Absolutely. Same thing. It's not like we are the unlucky ones that get all the, but same thing happens that insects from here go to other places and may be established. So yeah. Okay, so parasitoids, smaller than the host, usually inconspicuous. That's why we're talking about them, so you know they're there. Some of them are only millimeters in size, so you don't even notice them, but they're out there helping you control what we consider the pest insects. The thing about parasitoids that is different from predators are generalized, like spiders will eat anything they can catch. With parasitoids, they're much more specialized in their choice of hosts. Some only prey on a particular species of other insect or a particular group of other insects, but they're much more specialized. And the immatures almost always kill the host. It's only the females that search for the host. And this is bizarre, right? Because it's males and females of predators. The reason it's only the females that search for the host is it's because it's not the adults that do the feeding. What happens is that the adult females will lay their eggs or larvae in or on a host usually. And then what happens is, so that host, say gypsy moth, caterpillar, right? So this predatory parasitoid, wasp, will lay its egg on the gypsy moth, which is what this is. Here's a gypsy moth caterpillar, and these are the eggs of a parasitic wasp. So these little wasp eggs here will hatch into the wasp larva, which will burrow into the caterpillar and then eat the caterpillar from the inside out. That's what happens. And in this case, there's a little wasp that lays its own egg into this moth egg and will destroy what the pest that was in here, and because it just becomes a wasp. Somebody had a question about stink bugs. There are both native and non-native stink bugs, and then there are pest and good stink bugs, but we'll get to examples of all of these. Sorry, I'm just giving you a generalized overview at first. So adults are generally, so here's the thing about parasitoids, the adults usually are free living, mobile. They might be predaceous, but all these like little flies and wasps that are parasitoids, a lot of the adults feed on nectar and pollen. It's the larvae, right? So they lay their egg in other eggs, and those larvae then consume that host. But the adults fly around from flowers and things like that. So here's a little wasp attacking a pupa of a housefly. So this will never become a housefly. What will hatch out of here will be the wasp, right? It lays its egg in here, the wasp larva will develop and another wasp comes out. And then same thing here, this little wasp over here on the right is laying its egg into stink bug eggs. So all the little black eggs now are actually wasps. They're no longer stink bugs because the wasp egg that was laid in here developed into the wasp larva. It ate the stink bug, and now it's going to come out as that adult wasp. Insects are cool. And insect on insect warfare is fascinating. Okay. We're not talking a lot about nematodes. I just wanted to mention, if you hear the word nematode and it's like not in SpongeBob, nematodes are microscopic roundworms. Sometimes you hear about them as being bad for plants. So there are plant pathogenic, we call them nematodes. They feed on like turfgrass roots and other plant roots. But then there are what we call entomopathogenic species. So entomo for entomology for insect. So there are nematodes that are actually pathogens of insects. Right, so all this, like these little wormy things you see here, these are the nematodes that eventually devoured this caterpillar. So there are nematodes that feed on insects, and you can actually purchase them as a control method for some pests. Okay, so now we're going to get into the parade and the specific examples of the different beneficial insects. we may have to go quickly because I have a lot in here. So this is the first thing you need to know. Not only, so I know a lot of times people, you can't just assume that if you see an insect on a plant, that that's a pest of the plant, right? Because there's all, 97% of the insect species aren't a problem. They're either beneficial or they're just innocuous, right? They're not doing anything we consider good or bad. They're going about their life and they're part of the ecosystem and that kind of stuff. So first thing you need to be able to do is basically be able to identify your pests and know who your friends are, right? Because it's very easy to mistake some of these insects, like we've seen, in the chat, good guys for bad guys and vice versa. And look, I'm going to introduce you to some common ones, but realize there are millions of species of insects, and it takes time to learn the differences. Plus, the other thing that complicates it is that the larval insects sometimes look nothing like what they become as adults, right? So all of a sudden you think you have two different insects when really it's just two stages of the same insect. So it gets all complicated. All right, so we'll try to simplify it a little bit for you. Okay, so spiders are not insects, correct? Spiders are what we call arachnids, but spiders and insects are all what we consider arthropods. So it's not just beneficial insects, we'll say it's beneficial arthropods, right? So spiders are not insects. They have 8 legs instead of 6, 2 body regions instead of 3, like true insects. Who likes spiders? This is when I would have you raise your hands, but I can't see you guys. I don't know. People either love or hate spiders, I think. I think most people realize that spiders help in terms of them eating insects for us. There's about 3,000 species in North America, spider species. So if you don't like spiders, I'm sorry, but we have a lot of them. All spiders are predatory. So there's no plant feeding spider. All spiders feed on insects or arthropods or mites, right? So they feed on other arthropods. Most have venom glands, and that's what they use to, kill their prey. The good news is that spiders rarely bite people. We're not getting into every species of spider and what they can do to people, but if you talk about them as a whole, the 3,000 species, it's rare that they bite people. They're not hunting us. Generally, they're hunting insects. So they can do this in several different ways. Most spiders use webs, others hunt or ambush. I don't know if anyone knows what these two spiders are, but they're example of crab spiders. So crab spiders are like an ambush spider. Basically, a lot of times you might see them on flowers, kind of just hanging out. So they're waiting for an insect to come by, and then they grab it. They use their venom jaws, and that's how they subdue it. And what do you notice? Like they're kind of light or yellow colored. So sometimes they're not so easy to see on the flowers. Like they're doing a good job camouflaging in with the flowers, hopefully, so that the insects don't see them themselves. I'm sorry if you're afraid of spiders. We'll go through these pictures quickly. So the other way they hunt is most spiders produce webs, right? So like we have the garden orb weavers, those big spider webs that you don't see when you're walking your dog and all of a sudden you're like, ah, and your dog's like, what's the problem, right? So most produce spider webs and they catch insect prey in the webs. We have this cute little fuzzy guy up here. And this is called the jumping spider. I don't know if you've seen them before. They're small, they come in different colors. Some have like really nice iridescent jaws. I say nice, I realize what I'm saying. But jumping spiders people don't like because they actually jump, right? So that's kind of scary. But so they hunt their prey, and then we got trapdoor spiders, and then we had wolf spiders down here. Sometimes you find them in your garages and basements, things like that. That's another example of an actively hunting spider. So they go out and try to get their prey. So spiders are the good guys in that they feed on insects. The thing is, because they're such generalists, we don't, sometimes they're feeding on other beneficial insects as well, right? They don't, an insect is an insect to them. So they're not trying to see if, we like the insect or not. They just feed on an insect, whatever they can catch. All right, here we go. Here are the cute little ladybugs. So ladybugs are a type of beetle. Sometimes they're called ladybugs, even though they're beetles. Sometimes they're called ladybirds, ladybird beetles. So a couple different, common names for them. In the family Coccinellidae. Here's the thing, there's many species and they're variable in colors, they're variable in patterns. And yes, somebody made the comment before that sometimes it's hard to tell the good ladybugs from like other beetles that are not necessarily, pest beetles. So yes, oh, somebody's asking about purchasing lady beetles. We will get to there. It's not worth it, and we'll talk about why. So they eat soft-bodied insects. They especially love aphids, like love aphids, ravenous, go after aphids by the bazillions. Larvae, though, often go unrecognized, right? A lot of you, if I showed you just this, you would know that this is a ladybird beetle. This is one of our native species. This is a spotted ladybird beetle, and it is feeding on the eggs of Colorado potato beetle. So that's a good thing. It doesn't just feed on aphids. It feeds on soft-bodied insects and eggs. But this right here, this dragon-looking thing out here, this is the larva of a ladybird beetle, right? So here's an example of, like, if you don't know what the different stages look like, you might see this thing and be like, oh no, this is eating my plant. It's not. This is just a larva, and it's feeding on all these aphids around it. And it does a good job. It feeds on hundreds of them out of the plants. So the way you can identify aphids, usually you never find one aphid, right? When you see aphids, there's a whole group of aphids. Aphids generally have these little, we call them cornicles. So they look like little tails, little tail-like appendages at the end of their body. So most aphids, aphids come in, there's thousands of species, they come in all different colors, but most of them have these cornicles at the back. So this is an aphid. If you flip it over, this is its mouth part. So its mouth part is like a needle. We call it a stylet. So this needle they insert into the plant, and that's what they use to suck fluid out of the plants, and that's what they feed on. If we move over here to the right, what the heck is going on here? So this is an ant, which serves as guards. Like, ants farm aphids. It's so bizarre, but really cool. Because ants will feed on aphid excrement. If you've heard the term honeydew in terms of insects, this is what honeydew is. Honeydew is the partially digested sap that comes out the other end of the aphid. And a lot of other insects will actually feed on that. So aphids will feed, or ants will feed on insect honeydew to the point where they will guard and protect their little aphid colony from other insects that come in and try to feed on the aphids. So it's really cool. And then what I want to show you here in the middle is most of these aphids we're looking at don't have wings. During the growing season, what happens is most aphids are all females throughout the growing season. No males necessary. They reproduce without males. The females will give birth to live female young, who will give birth to live female young throughout the growing season. But sometimes what happens is that they'll produce adults that have wings. Like, if they know that their plant is starting to go downhill, the plant is starting to get stressed out, they'll produce a generation that has wings. So these little wing guys can then fly to another host as the plant is starting to decline. And then the other thing that happens is in the fall, before winter, they will produce male offspring, and then male and female offspring will mate, and certain species will lay eggs, and that's how they overwinter. So cool, right? Let's see. Okay, so back to lady beetles. I just wanted to show you what aphids were first, because we were talking about them with anything. Do aphids cause the plant to decline? They can, but a lot of times aphids don't generally kill a plant. It's something that, there's other things going on that might kill the plant. They can deform it. Sometimes they can kill it. See, questions like that, it totally depends on the plant, whether it's an annual, perennial, or the species, stuff like that. So generally they don't kill the plant, but they can. How's that for a vague answer? All right, so we had the question about ladybugs that you can buy. I don't recommend it, but we'll make one. Here's why I don't recommend it. One reason is that the adults can fly away, right? So you buy this little jar of ladybugs or ladybird beetles. The other bad reason to buy them is a lot of them are wild caught, right? So in the winter, like, aphids, will see on the right how there's this congregation, not aphids, but congregation of ladybugs, like out in the wilds. They will hibernate like monarchs, right? Monarchs, if you've seen, they all hibernate in one area. Well, a lot of species of ladybugs do that in like big masses. They hibernate, and what happens is people go out and collect them from those natural masses. They put them in the refrigerator, and then that's what you buy, and then you release them and they all fly away, because that's what they would do anyway after winter. They have like a layer of fat And they use that to fly to hosts. So basically, if you buy ladybugs, your neighbors might be happy, but they're probably flying away from you. And then we also have these non-native ladybugs that, yeah, they come inside in the winter and they hibernate in people's garages or inside in big masses. So a lot of the ladybugs we've talked about are generalists, but some are specialists. So on the left here is what we call a mealybug destroyer. So these little beetles here are ladybugs or ladybird beetles, and they specifically feed on mealybugs. Right here in the middle, this tiny little, I mean, it's blown up for you, but it's very tiny, like a couple millimeters. This is what's called the spider mite destroyer. So this little black ladybug in the middle feeds exclusively on spider mites, and it's very good at it, but they are specialized feeders. Okay, so I talked about how it's really important to be able to identify the pests and the beneficials. And here I'm throwing in like why it's hard to do. So here's that mealybug destroyer ladybug right here, this little orange and brown beetle. That's the adult. These little pink guys are the mealybugs it's feeding on. But who the heck would know that this white, fluffy, woolly thing is the larva of this ladybug, right? I mean, I would be confused if you just saw this on the plant. This looks like a mealybug. It looks like a pest of a plant, but this is the larva of this predatory beetle. So like, yeah, sometimes it gets a little hard to tell which is the good guy, which is the bad guy, depending on the species. Cool, right? Okay, praying mantids. It's a myth. There are no state or federal laws protecting praying mantids. Still, you don't want to just arbitrarily kill them. So praying mantids are generalized predators. Basically, they will feed on whatever they can catch, and they do that by using their large forelegs, right? They have these grasping forelegs with spines, and they catch the insect, and then they use their mouth parts to feed on it. And basically, so they're beneficial because they will feed on pests, but like spiders, because they feed on any insect they can catch, sometimes they're catching other beneficial insects, right? So, but in general, they're the good guys. They're feeding on other insects. And if you haven't seen it before, these are what the overwintering egg cases look like. So sometime in the late summer, fall, the females will lay these egg cases. They're kind of like foamy and bubbly. They look like that expandable foam a little bit. And you'll find these on branches and things like that, or anywhere near where they were. You can find them on man-made structures as well. Up to 200 eggs in the egg case, and these will hatch in the spring into little nymphs that look like baby adults, and they will grow and become adults. But these guys are highly, what's the word? Cannibalistic. So when they hatch, the first ones to hatch start feeding on their siblings until there's, a food source. So how big is the egg case? I would say up to 2 inches, maybe between 1 inch and 2 inches, just depending on how big the egg it was. Yeah, this looks like the native egg case. There are also Chinese species of praying mantids that have egg cases that are similar, but they are shaped a little bit differently. And that's a good point. A lot of times when you're looking, so if you find these egg cases in the garden in the winter, leave them, right? That's good. You're going to have them next fall. Don't do like I did one year and bring them inside because you wanted to use it as show and tell for an elementary school class. And then they all hatch into your closet because it's very warm in your house. That happened once. And then I had praying mantids everywhere. So don't do that. Leave them in your garden if you see them. So you can buy praying mantid egg cases, but you got to be careful because a lot of times what's being sold are the non-native. They're going to be the Chinese species of praying mantids. So birds like to eat the egg cases. Yeah, they could. If that's the egg case, how big is the mantis? Like 4 to 5 inches. Yeah, they could be big as full-grown adults. Okay, so there's a couple different species. They're generally brown to green, just depending on the species. I once found an adult sitting on the bar of the shopping cart when I went into a store. I was like, oh, I'm going to take you outside before someone freaks out. You have to be careful, though, because they try to pinch you, too. See, it was lucky. It was lucky that I picked that shopping cart. Okay, so lacewings. Maybe some of you have heard of lacewings. They're not always very conspicuous, but they're a good predator. Voracious predator in the landscape. So we have both green and brown lacewings. The green ones are about twice the size. of the brown lacewings. They eat soft-bodied insects, but the adults, like you see up here, so this is a green lacewing up top. The adults will also feed on pollen and nectar as adults. They do feed on some insects, but it's the larvae that are the voracious eaters of other insects. So if I didn't tell you, would you know that this adult makes these babies over here, right? They look nothing like each other. So the larva of the green lacewing is down here. It's got these big jaws that it used to feed on aphids. You can see a little green aphid, a brown aphid in here. You know, you can see it because it's a still, but after this photo was taken, they were probably toast. So it feeds on aphids, it loves them, and other soft-bodied creatures. What we have here in the middle, these little lollipops on the leaf, these are actually the lacewing eggs. So the females of the green lacewings, they'll lay their eggs on these little stalks. And we presume that's so that it protects the eggs from, remember I told you ants try to kill other things, you know, to protect the aphids. So it protects, we think that these little stalks protect, you know, they're just tall enough so that the ants can't get to the eggs and other predatory insects can't get to the eggs. The other thing is these guys are also cannibals, right? So it protects the second egg from the first egg that hatches, right? So the first egg that hatches, that larva would try to eat its siblings, just like the praying mantids. So it's pretty cool. You can purchase lacewing eggs for the garden. Sometimes they come on like a sticky card. Of all the insects that you can purchase for the landscape, you may have the greatest success with the lacewing eggs in terms of adding them to your yard. What else do we have here? Okay, so that was lacewings. So we're basically doing like the top dozen groups of beneficial insects, and we're halfway through already, so we go quickly now. All right, ground beetles. Ground beetles. This is the largest family of beetles, at least in New Jersey. So this is a highly diverse family of beetles. They can look very different from each other, but very similar. They come in, sometimes they're metallic, but a lot of them are black or brown. In this case, these are tiger beetles, which are a type of ground beetle. The shiny, we saw that earlier, the shiny metallic beetle. Remember, these guys are very fast. Ground beetles and tiger beetles, they're predatory, they're generalized predators. Besides feeding on insects, they will also feed on maggots. Maggots are an insect, but I mean, they'll also feed on slugs and snails. Good news in the vegetable garden. So they're nocturnal. During the day, they hide under rocks and logs and, you know, just protected areas from the midday sun. And then they feed at night on basically whatever kind of insect they can catch. So I'm sure you've seen a ground beetle before. If you garden, you've seen them. You might not have known what they were, but there's a lot of species. They can look similar, but have different colors. Do lacewings suck the juice out of the plants? No. Lacewings do not suck the juice out of plants. The lacewings suck the juices out of the insects. And then the adults will feed on nectar and pollen. They don't feed on the leaves. What is the black beetle? The black beetle on the left, so this is one species of ground beetle. And they're, you know, not all ground beetles have common names because there's so many species. So it's not like everyone has a common name, but for the common name for the group is a ground beetle. Yes, somebody's saying there's a different species called a lacewing, or there are lace bugs. That's a pest. Lace bugs are a pest. Laced wings are the good guys. Okay, so we're gonna be here till midnight because I just love talking about bugs. So I'll just keep spewing bugs. Okay, another group of insects are the predatory flies. Most people don't like flies, right? Like flies bite us or flies get on our food, but there's a whole bunch of flies that are good guys. So these are predatory flies. I'm guessing a lot of you, if you've, you know, taken a look at flowers, you may have seen them. You may not have known what they were, or just assume that they were bees or wasps, because some, what we call hover flies or flower flies, sometimes we just call them syrphid flies for the name of the family. These are the little guys that a lot of them look like bees or wasps. They're not, they're true flies. And they will hover like around the flowers, like little tiny fly versions of hummingbirds. The way you can tell that this is a fly and not a bee is that the flies are cute, the maggots are not. Oh, come on, it's in the eye of the beholder. Never mind. Okay. So the way you can tell that these flies are not bees or wasps, they only have one pair of wings, right? One pair of wing, one pair right here. If when we get to bees and wasps, you may see that, you know, most other insects, when they have wings, they have two pairs. Except flies, all true flies have one pair of wings. So no stinger here. That, you know, they don't bite. The adults will feed on nectar and pollen, but it's these larvae, the big green slug-like thing over here. This does a nice job, and you can see an aphid in its mouth here to the left. So it's about to feed on this aphid. So another reason you got to be careful, right? You're scouting your plants, you're looking, you see this green slug thing, and you think it's a pest because you think, you know, it'd be very easy to mistake this as some sort of green slug. But this is actually a good guy, and it's the larvae of these flies, and they eat soft-bodied insects. Fun, right? So these guys are important. You'll see them all over if you start looking, if you haven't noticed them before. So they're naturally out there. We don't have any that are sold commercially. So just be aware that they're out there. And then we'll talk about ways we can kind of attract beneficial insects in general. I mean, what do you notice? You notice flowers in pictures, right? A lot of the adults of predators, it's the larvae that feed on the pests, while the adults of a lot of these predators will feed on pollen and nectar. Not in all cases, but sometimes. So, right, flowers, you can't go wrong with flowers. I know we're getting to more and more like disgusting flies. I'm sorry. We also have little tiny, what we call midges. When I say midge, most people think of like biting midges, right? But flies, thousands of different flies. The biting midges have nothing to do with plants. And this predatory midge right here, this little tiny fly that almost looks like a mosquito, what it does is it lays eggs that develop into maggots. And these maggot, and you can see one here, this little orange thing within the middle of this aphid colony is the maggot from this little fly. And this, again, little like soft, kind of ugly maggot will feed on hundreds and hundreds of aphids. So they're out there. You might not notice them because they're so small. I mean, aphids are small, and then look at the maggot, same size. So they're out there, just good to know if you are examining a colony closely. 20 minutes, oh my goodness. Okay. So we did flies. If you have any questions, let me know. Now we're getting into a group of what we call predatory bugs. So all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. Does that make sense? So we have basically an order of insects that we call the true bugs. Everything else is an insect, but the true bugs is the common name for the order Hemiptera. A lot of Latin. So basically, but it's a particular grouping of insects that we call the true bugs, and they all have piercing, sucking mouth parts. They all have like a needle that they either, if they're pests, they feed on the plant with that needle-like mouth part. If they're beneficial, they feed on the insect with that needle-like mouth part. So good question. Is maggot another name for larva? So maggot is the larva of flies, right? So different like groups of insects have different names for their larva. So maggots are fly larvae, grubs are beetle larvae, for example. Caterpillars are butterfly and moth larvae. So yeah, it's a good question. It's just a specific term for the larva of a particular group of insects. I feel like I want another hour just to do an entomology thing, like basic entomology, because you can see that I love this. Okay, so these are called big-eyed bugs, right? Humans get really creative with common names sometimes. So here it is. They have big eyes on the side of their head. And these are predatory little bugs. And here it is feeding with its needle-like mouth part on a leafhopper. So this leafhopper is a plant pest, and the big-eyed bug hunts it. And that's what they feed on. They also feed on, if you chinch bugs in the lawn, they love chinch bugs, but they'll feed on other soft-bodied insects and mites and things like that. You commonly find them on flowers, so they're the good guys. This is one particular, group of insects, the predatory bugs, where it's really difficult to tell predatory bug from pest bug, unless you familiarize yourself with the species, because they just look so similar, and there's not like one thing I can tell you that makes the good one different from the bad one. In this case, big-eyed bugs are different because they have these big eyes. Most other bugs don't have that, but in terms of the whole group, it's hard to tell. Oh, see, I love fellow bug lovers in the chat. Excellent. Okay, another type of predatory bug are what we call damsel bugs. So they're just they almost look like narrow versions of stink bugs. They also have these piercing, sucking mouth parts. They have thick front legs. They're called, so I read that they're called damsel bugs because generally they hold their front legs up like they're holding up a hoop skirt or something like that. I don't know. Again, humans and our common names. So they have this nice piercing, sucking mouth part, and they hunt insects, and they're fast, and they feed on lots of different insects. And they're kind of inconspicuous, only about 3/8 of an inch max. But so they're a group of predators. We're going quickly through this category because there's a bunch. These little guys are called minute pirate bugs. What is bugwood.org? So Bugwood is a website where that has curated insect images. That's what it is. So if you're looking, you know, for educational talks and things like that, they have images of all kinds of insects on there. Bald-faced hornet nest will die in the winter, so you can just leave it. Okay. Minute pirate bugs, about 1/16 of an inch long, black and white. They feed on eggs. So here it is feeding on an egg of a pest. So these guys are very small, 1/16 of an inch in size. Hard to notice. They're found throughout the summer, all, you know, gardens, woods, fields. The thing about these guys is they're out very early in the spring. If you're doing any kind of cleanup and gardening in the spring, I mean, we always tell you should wear gloves because you never know when a spider, like you get in the way of a spider or an insect that might bite you. Minute pirate bugs, you know, they're not hunting you, but they can bite you if you happen to be gardening where they are and you brush against them. So they can bite you. And, you know, insect bites are allergic reactions, so some people react more so than other people. For some people, it's like a mosquito bite. Some people don't feel it at all. Just be aware you can get accidentally bit by them. And stink bugs. Yes, somebody had the comment earlier. A lot of the stink bugs we know of we consider them bad, right? Because they feed on plants, or like here we have brown recluse, brown marmorated stink bugs, and they overwinter in our houses, sometimes by the thousands. So they're a nuisance and they're plant feeders. But there are also good stink bugs in terms of being predatory stink bugs. They can be green, brown, black. There's all different species. They can be variable. Some of them, like you see down here, are brightly colored. Stink bugs produce a foul odor when they're disturbed. So like, think about it. If you're a bird that grabs a stink bug and all of a sudden this disgusting smell and taste come at you, you're going to drop that stink bug. So that is their chemical defense against, you know, other things that might eat them. They feed on caterpillars, beetles, lots of other insects. So stink bugs, kind of 5-sided, right? The family is Pentatomidae, 5-sided, but again, you can see that highly variable coloration depending on species. So in this case, it's very difficult to know what's the pest, what's the good guy, unless you know what, you know, particular one you're looking at. Good question. Are the brightly colored ones a warning to others, like poison dart frogs? So good, because I wanted to mention that. Perfect, thank you. So this bright coloration in nature, like red, yellow, lady beetles and bees and wasps, we call that aposematic coloration. It is a warning coloration. Some, like with bees and wasps, it means they're poisonous, right? There's venom. They have venom, so they're toxic. Other insects are not necessarily toxic, but they've evolved to kind of mimic what other dangerous looking insects look like. So they'll have warning coloration and they might not necessarily, you know, be dangerous in the same way. So yes, generally speaking, though, this bright coloration signals some sort of danger, either chemical or distasteful flavor, or poisonous, or something like that. Cool. So this is just cool, right? I told you, insect warfare is just awesome. So here we have a larva of a spine soldier bug. So this is a native predatory stink bug right here. And you can see it's inserted its mouth and is sucking the life out of this caterpillar, this pest caterpillar. And then here we have on the right an adult, we call this the two-spotted stink bug. Careful, because if you vegetable garden, you might know what harlequin bugs are. They're also black and orange and have some white. So just be careful, because one's a plant pest. This one's a good guy. Anyone know what this is that it's feeding on? I mean, like, that's just cool. Or gross, you know, depending on your perspective. It's a good guess. So somebody thinks it's feeding on a ladybug larva. Some ladybug pupae actually look like this, but this is actually the larva, of a Colorado potato beetle. Do you guys know what that is? massive pests in the garden can be. So this is a good guy in the vegetable garden feeding on Colorado potato beetle. Oh, this class is just not long enough. Okay. Some people are thinking it's way too long, too many bugs. Just think you're going to be watching Jeopardy one day. You'll get some sort of an inane question about stink bugs and you'll be able to answer it for yourself. Okay, assassin bugs. Thank you, Patty. Okay, predatory bugs, assassin bugs, really evil name, right? Again, they're not assassinating you, they're assassinating other insects. So this is family Regiviidae. They feed on other insects. There's lots of different species. Some of them can be fairly large in the insect world, right? 1.5 inches is pretty big. But because it's a highly variable family, they all look different from each other. But they attack small flying insects and, you know, aphids, leafhoppers, beetles, eggs, all kinds of stuff, basically whatever they can catch. And again, you can see they have this nice piercing, sucking mouth part that they hold below. And when they catch their prey, they insert that needle into the bug and suck its juice out. And then in this case, it's another example of here's the adult on the left, and here's the nymph or the larva of the same species. This is a wheel bug. So we have wheel bugs here. They're fairly large, up to 1.5 inches, and they're called wheel bugs, you know, the common name, because it looks like they have this wheel cog on their thorax. Pretty cool for the adults. But, you know, I remember in the diagnostic lab this year, we got sent a picture, you know, somebody found all these little black and red ones and didn't know what they were because they look totally different, right? But they're the same thing and they both feed on pests. Careful though, you don't want to grab these. They can bite you, but it's because they're being mishandled. You know, really any handling by you is mishandling for them. So don't pick them up. Ooh, now predatory wasps. See, this is why I started the talk. The cover slide was the bald-faced hornet. People tend not to like wasps. You just got to know what they are and stay away if necessary. So predatory wasps, it's a huge group. So we got hornets and yellow jackets, digger wasps, paper wasps, all kinds of things. And most people don't think of them as predators, but they are, because what they do is the adults will feed on insects and caterpillars and things like that, because what they do is here's something really gross, they will feed on that caterpillar and then they will regurgitate that meat to their larvae back at the colony. So this is a protein source for the young. Tasty, right? What's the next? So here's just a couple of examples, you know, again, thousands of species of bees and wasps. We can't go through them all. Just be aware that most of, you know, at some point the adults are feeding on insects. So they will feed on pest insects, but sometimes they feed on beneficials just because they're feeding on whatever's there. But what do you also notice about them? They're not typically what you think of as pollinators, right? But they do pollinate because the adults will feed on pollen and nectar. It's when they feed on the other insects, that's what they feed to their larvae, right? So here we have bald-faced hornet at the top left. This is a paper wasp here finishing off a caterpillar. And then we have a digger wasp down here feeding on another caterpillar. So they use the females, right? It's the females that capture the prey. Only female bees and wasps have a stinger. So for the males, it's all ego. Just kidding. So male bees and wasps don't have a stinger. It's the females, so that they subdue, you know, their prey, kill it, eat it, regurgitate it back to the young. And it goes on. There's also these tiny little parasitic wasps. You don't even notice them. So now we switch from predators to parasites. These parasitic wasps, these tiny little millimeter long wasps, you don't even notice. They will lay their eggs into eggs of pests. So that's what's happening here. This tiny little parasitic wasp, it's laying its eggs, I think it's a Colorado potato beetle eggs. So all the little black or gray eggs are no longer the pest, no longer the Colorado potato beetle. These are going to become more wasps that will emerge and will hunt and lay their eggs in other Colorado potato beetle eggs. So pretty cool. A lot of these little parasitic wasps are available for purchase, and they do well in like enclosed environments. Like they're great biocontrols in greenhouses and things like that. Don't know that it's worth it for, you know, landscape, because again, they fly, you know, and if you don't have the pest around, well, then they're going to fly away and not generally establish themselves. Sorry, we've got to go quickly. And then there's a whole bunch of, wasps in the Bracondid family that will parasitize aphids. Going quickly, I just want to show you what that means. If you've ever heard the term aphid mummy, this is what it was. So when you see these big, like puffy, they almost look like what are those like snacks that like are air puffed? So these are like the air puffed aphids. So when you see these in a colony, this means they're mummies. And what's happened is that this wasp has laid an egg in the aphid. That wasp larva is in the aphid. It eats the aphid alive. Here you can see it's been cut open for you. So what you see in here, this is the larva of the wasp, the top right. Yes, it is so gross. I know, but so cool too. So here's the wasp. And then when the wasp pupates and it's ready to emerge as an adult, it will cut this like usually perfectly circular hole in that aphid mummy and will emerge. So look, like if you have aphids this coming season, look around and look for these mummies. And then we have trichogramma wasps. Look at this. It's like David and Goliath here. Tiny little wasp will lay its egg into this moth egg, and now the egg is parasitized. It will only become a wasp. It will no longer become the caterpillar. Right? So cool. These are commercially available, lots of different species. Again, but like there's no recipe like how many do you buy per acre? That's not well worked out. I just want to show you, this is imported cabbage worm, a pest of our brassica crops. So here's a wasp that will feed on the pupa of the cabbage worm, and then here's another wasp species that has pupated outside the larva of the cabbage worm. So like different adults will, or different species of these wasps will feed on different species, different stages of the insect. Here we go. Here are the hornworms. We'll just go quickly through this. Tomato hornworm and tobacco hornworm look very similar. If you've seen these are like big green caterpillars. And then like you feel like instantaneously you don't see them, and then there are like no leaves on your tomato plant. So this has happened to me when I had a hanging basket tomato plant. We don't have to go through all of this. So basically they pupate in the soil, they emerge as adults, they mate, look away if necessary. The females will lay eggs. Those eggs hatch into these adorable, tiny, almost microscopic little caterpillars with this giant tail. But caterpillars are basically walking stomachs. Their whole purpose is to eat and grow. So quickly they will consume the tomato leaves, and then they will start consuming the tomatoes, and then they will turn into these giant finger-sized caterpillars. And then when it's time for them to pupate, they drop to the ground, they pupate, and then they will emerge as the next generation. Here's that moth again. But anyway, if you've ever seen this is super cool. Leave this in the garden. If you've ever seen these green caterpillars, the hornworms with all these white things sticking out of it, these are the pupae of the wasps. So these pupae, from these pupae will emerge all of these wasps. So at this point, when you see these caterpillars, they're still alive, but they're like zombies. They're basically the walking dead, because the wasp and the virus that the wasp injects along with its eggs kind of take over the functions of the caterpillar, and they make it not eat. So at this point it's alive, but it's no longer doing damage, and all these wasps come out. And then here's a fly that also came out, so that'll be our last group of insects. We're going to skip over this. This just shows you that there's an actual virus that the parasite, this wasp, has, and it's the virus that causes the caterpillar to not it causes the caterpillar's immune system not to outright kill the wasp. So it's pretty cool. So here's a tiny little wasp, all these pupae. Here's just the tiny little horn of the caterpillar. Thank you. I'm sorry that I got like 4 minutes. Okay, cicada killer wasp. People are afraid of these. You may see these in late summer. They're big, right? So they look scary. Be aware that they're not aggressive. It's like yellow jackets. You should be afraid of yellow. If you look at a yellow jacket wrong, it stings you. But not cicada killer wasps. They go after cicadas, not people. But so they're these large wasps with the amber wings, a couple inches in size. So what do? The females make tunnels in open areas, and basically you'll see these. See, here's one sticking out of the tunnel. They like sandy areas and foundations and things like that. And so what happens is the female cicada killer wasps, they will hunt for cicadas up in the trees, and then they paralyze them with their stinger. So the cicadas are still alive. Yeah, would you be as calm? It just landed there. So then, this is the case where the parasitoid, like its prey is bigger Here's the cicada underneath the wasp, not the guy. The guy is not the prey. But here's the case where the parasitoid is pretty big. So the females drag the cicadas into the burrow. She'll lay an egg on it. This egg will hatch into this larva, which is the larva of the wasp. And then that larva will grow, suck the life out of that cicada. You have males versus females. Depending on how many cicadas she leaves in the burrow, it will become either male or female cicada killer wasp. It will pupate, and then the following year, you'll see the adults. Cool, right? Cool. One more, parasitic flies. So there's 1,300 species in North America of what we call tachinid flies. It's a particular family of flies. It's really hard to ID flies. There's so many of them and they all look similar. But with these tachinid flies, we use like wing venation patterns and like the patterns of hairs on the body. Like it's hard to identify fly species. It's not very straightforward. But anyway, a lot of tachinid flies are often confused for bees like this one maybe, or house flies they look like. And what they do is, because they're parasitoids, so anybody know what this beetle is? It's like practically the state insect of New Jersey. It's not, that's the honeybee. But this is Japanese beetle. We have them like crazy, right? They feed on our roses and all kinds of different plants. But these little white or like tan dots on it, these are the eggs of the fly. So these eggs hatch into maggots, right? Those are the larvae of flies. So this maggot will have been inside this larva. It will pupate. Here's an example of the pupa, this brown little oval thing. And then from the pupa, it will emerge as an adult fly, which may then lay its eggs on a caterpillar. Here you can see the little eggs, right? So that's what parasitoids do. Whew. We got 2 minutes for pollinators. I'm sorry. All right, so pollinators, what do? This seems obvious, right? But what is pollination? Pollination is basically when you move pollen either to a different part of the plant, the different part of the same flower, right, from the male part to the female part, or when you're moving pollen to completely different flowers on a different individual plant, right? But the whole purpose of pollination is that's how you produce fertile seed, right? That's how the plant will then be able to keep going into the future from that fertile seed. So food crop, so many of our food crops and just plants in general rely on insect pollinators. There are a lot of plants that get pollinated by wind, and other natural things like that, but a lot of plants need insect pollinators. So bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, wasps, flies, hummingbirds, this is just some of the common pollinators. Bees are super effective pollinators because that's all they do. They only feed on parts of the flower. It's not like moths and butterflies where the caterpillar is feeding on another part of the plant or a different plant. We'll get to that. So with bees, even before, what we know is as honeybees were brought into the country, we had 4,000 species of bees that are native to North America that do pollination. And the way you separate kind of two classifications, there's social versus solitary. Okay, so it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to keep going for anyone who can stay. The good news is, good news if you want to see the end, this will be recorded and will be on the Jersey Friendly Yards website for you. So I will keep going for a few minutes if people want to stay. If you have to go, please go, and thank you for coming. So a few more minutes. So bumblebees are a type of social bee, meaning they make a nest, like you can think of a hive like a honeybee. So they make a nest, right? There's a queen, there's workers, they take care of the young. There's a social system to it. So they all like work for the common goal of the colony. There's about 47 species of bumblebees in North America. They're fuzzy, they're robust. So they're hairy, they're robust. They're usually yellow and black. Sometimes they're yellow, orange, and black. Sometimes they're orange and black, right? But they're like cute, kind of robust, fuzzy little bees. Be aware though, if you accidentally grab a bumblebee, they will sting you and it does hurt. That's if you accidentally grab it. Don't do that. Bumblebees, I don't know if you've ever seen a bumblebee hive or colony, nest they call it. It's like messy. And they tend to make their nest in dry, dark cavities. So a lot of times they'll exploit like old rodent holes and things like that. Or if you have like piles of twigs or logs, You know, if you've got an old mattress that's laying out back, they'll even go into that. Any kind of dark, dry cavity. Not that I think you have a dark, a mattress in the backyard, but just be aware any kind of protected area like that. And what you'll find are what we call like messy nests, right? It's not that nice, organized honeybee comb that we're used to. It's these little wax pots that they fill with larvae and nectar and pollen. Yeah, this one almost looks like it's in a bird's nest. I don't know where this, where the picture was taken, but it was, a lot of times you'll see them in like piles of like yard debris, if not underground in rodent holes. So if you see something like that, or you come up across something like that, you might be able to recognize that it's a bumblebee nest. So those are basically the species of bumblebees are your social bees example, right? They make that colony, they work together within it. And then we have what are called solitary bees. Generally speaking, solitary bees, you may have a lot of them in one area just because that area is like a good area for them, but they're not working together. That just means you have individual females laying eggs, laying their own larvae, and they're not participating with the care of each other's larvae. So that's what we mean by solitary bees. But again, you might have a lot of them in one area because it's a good area. They found a good place to nest. So we have things like sweat bees. I don't know if you've ever seen these little green bees on the flowers. Sometimes some species of sweat bees are like metallic green up front, and then the abdomen, it's like they're two different insects. The abdomen is yellow and black striped, like a different bee or wasp. So it's kind of funny. They're green up here and then yellow and black over here. But sweat bees, so they're pollinators. They nest in the ground. They're kind of cool because some of them actually build like apartment buildings, meaning that a lot of females will lay their eggs in the same place and sort of participate together in the raising. So they have like, depending on species of sweat bee, they have all kinds of different levels of solitary to kind of almost social. So it's pretty neat. Why are they called sweat bees? Because sometimes in the summer they will land on you to lick the salty sweat off of you. So don't swat them. So that's why they're called sweat bees. And here we have on the right, this is an example of a leafcutter bee, one species of leafcutter bee. I don't know if you've seen the damage. If you see these perfectly round like holes in the edges of leaves, it's a good bet this was a leafcutter bee. So what they do is they cut these like round little discs out of the leaves, and then they line the nests of their little chambers with these little discs of leaf tissue, and then they will lay their egg in there. That will become the larval bee. They leave food for it, like a ball of pollen basically for it, and that larva will develop on there. So, but this is a very distinctive kind of plant damage that they do. Again, this is aesthetic damage. They're not killing this plant, they're cutting a few discs out of it. But so leafcutter bees are another example. But there's all kinds of ground bees, that are also pollinators. We see them coming up in the spring sometimes. And generally speaking, bees and wasps are not very aggressive, except for yellow jackets. I have a whole hour-long talk on yellow jackets and why they're evil. No, I'm just kidding. They're not evil, but they're most of the time, let's go back. Bees and wasps, the ones that are going to be more aggressive are the ones that are social, they're aggressive because they have a colony to protect, right? They're protecting, if you get close to their nest, they're protecting their babies. And the solitary bees just go about their business, right? They just go about their business. They're generally not aggressive. And remember, just the females have stingers. Okay, and then the last example of pollinators are your butterflies and moths. So I just put a couple in here, right? Tiger swallowtail, very, very common. Ooh, somebody's mentioning mason bees. Yeah, mason bees are another pollinator, and you can make your own like houses kind of for these bees if you look it up. It's pretty cool. Here we have an Easter blue-tailed butterfly, and then we have a white-lined sphinx moth. So all of these adults feed on nectar, so while they're feeding on nectar, they're also pollinating the flowers, right? So we love butterflies and moths. Just be aware that some of these, that the caterpillars are what we call the larvae of butterflies and moths, but be aware that those caterpillars need to feed on something, right? So they're feeding on plants of some kind, maybe the same plant that the adults are feeding on, maybe a completely different plant. But that's what they're doing. They're pollinating our plants. So we're going to end here with this slide, which is too many words. I'm very sorry. No gross insect picture or cool insect picture, however you look at it. So I just want to go over a little bit about attracting and sustaining beneficial insects in the landscape. And we've sort of touched on, we can kind of go through this, and it's not, nothing you wouldn't think of, I think. So basically, the first thing is you want to develop a tolerance for some plant damage, right? If you're going to have insects, beneficial insects in the yard, they're feeding on pest insects, which are doing damage. We just talked about it. The caterpillars of butterflies will feed on plants, right? So you're planting those plants knowing that to get butterflies, you have to have caterpillars feeding on those plants, right? So develop some tolerance for plant damage. You're not going to have perfectly undamaged plants. You want to provide a shelter for these insects. So what does that mean? Okay, in the case of the comments about the mason bee house, I mean, you can physically either buy or make like a little, homemade shelter. The other thing is this is a really good excuse to be I'm a lazy gardener sometimes. So like, you don't need to have an immaculately spotless yard. Like I know people that live near us, they basically vacuum. It's almost like they vacuum their yard. It is immaculate. There's not a leaf out of place. There's no twig left anywhere. The yard is immaculate. But that means there's not a whole lot of places for these insects to kind of hide, right? A lot of these predatory insects need a place to get away from the midday heat, so they'll hide in leaves, under shrubs, things like that. So by providing shelter, yes, you can make things like mason bee houses, but you can also just be aware that like shrubs, the leaves under shrubs, little twig piles, logs, things like that, those are all different types of shelters for different types of insects. So it's kind of like, be a little messy in the yard because those are all areas and niches where these insects will hang out. Increase plant diversity. You want to grow a wide assortment of plant species. And then I think, where is it? And then to that same point, you want to choose these for the beneficial insects, you want to choose their favorite plants, right? What are their favorite plants? Well, like our native pollinators have evolved with native plants, and same thing with the predators and parasites. They've evolved with native plants. That's what they know best. Increasing diversity. So you want to grow a whole lot of different plant species. The other thing you want to do is, right, a lot of these insects, the pollinators, yes, they only deal, the adults deal with the food, pollen and nectar. They need flowers, but adults of all these other predators also need the pollen, which is a protein source, and carbohydrates, which is the nectar. So you want flowering plants, but you want to make sure that you have plants flowering all through the season, right? Because some of these guys come out really early, so they need flowers really early in the spring. Dragonflies, there's a comment. Yes, dragonflies are also beneficial predators. They're generalized and they feed on all kinds of insects. So you want to make sure you have flowers really early, not just like in the summer, and also really late into the fall. So you want a continuum of flowers because there's always going to be species of beneficial insects that are around and that need them. Oh, that was my next point right there, succession of flowering. And also remember, like tiny flowers. Yes, we like big showy flowers. Those are great. Pollinators will go to there. But remember, a lot of these parasitic wasps are like millimeters in size, right? So as adults, they need basically flowers that are their size. So they need nectaries that are their size. So like tiny little flowers like Queen Anne's lace and dill and things like that. So little flowers for little beneficials. So another thing you want to do is try to reduce the use of broad spectrum and preventative pesticides. We're not going to get to the whole slide about pesticides, but even organic insecticides, like they don't know the difference between pests and predatory insects or beneficial insects, right? Insects are insects. So even organic insecticides will kill beneficial insects. So, as much as you can. If your goal is to keep bugs in the yard, then you should try to be getting away from those types of chemical inputs as much as possible. Some things you may not think about is replacing a lot of insects, and especially, a lot of adult insects, the flying insects, are attracted to lights at night. A lot of the pollinators are, a lot of the moths are, and what happens is they're attracted to white light especially. So what you can do is you can change to yellow bulbs, and that's what I did at my house because right here's my front door, and right here is the light. Right, so what happens? You have this white porch light on, and every time you open the door, you're like sucking all these insects into the house. But worse yet, you're wasting the time and energy of these pollinators and other beneficials because they're spending all night circling around your white light. So yellow bulbs do a lot better job of discouraging that. They're not as attractive. I'm the only house in my whole block with yellow bulbs. It's cool, right? That's good job. I know, I love my yellow bulbs. And then the other thing is, if you can't get yellow, then at least use motion sensors, right? So that they're not on the whole night with insects buzzing around and losing their energy all night. Okay, this kind of probably, I think, should go without saying, don't use bug zappers. If you want good bugs, because they did a study in University of Delaware and Dr. Talamy, they counted like 48,000 insects from a bug zapper, and I don't know, like 2 were biting flies, and the rest were just all kinds of other insects that got in there. So, don't use a bug zapper. You're catching a lot of things that you don't intend to catch, not just mosquitoes. And then, there's a comment about LED bulbs are less attractive to insects too. I think so, but I think it's specifically yellow LED bulbs, from what I've read. It's specifically the yellow, maybe less so the LED, but I think yellow works better. And yellow LED, well, there you go. And then pun fully intended, be patient. The thing is, there's a lot of things you can do to kind of encourage and maintain insects, beneficials in your yard. You could pick some of these things or one of these things to start with. Everybody wants, you see these Better Homes and Gardens landscapes that are beautiful, like beautifully planned flowers, and you're like, how can you do that? And it seems so intimidating. Just start small. It takes time for plants to establish. Start small. Start with a few, native plants. If you go to the jerseyfriendly.org, the website where you signed up for this program, there's beautiful links to different native plants and where to get them, and lists that are great for these beneficial insects. There's also a whole section about integrated pest management, where you can find more information about the predators and parasitoids and just how to use integrated pest management in your landscape to kind of reduce harm that is done to beneficial insects as you're taking care of plants that you want. And let's see. With that, we'll end it. I hope you're not like my dogs. You're not all asleep on the sofa at the end of this. So I will hang around for a little bit if you have questions. Thank you, everyone. Let's see. There was a question. I saw something about diatomaceous earth.
Yeah, the question, let's see. The diatomaceous earth, there was a question in the chat and in the Q&A about do they harm beneficial bugs? Does the diatomaceous earth harm, or does it kill all insects? So it was kind of the same kind of question.
So diatomaceous earth, if you don't know what it is, it's the ground up, basically skeletons of diatoms, these little organisms. So it's like, they're sharp. It's a powder. You buy it as a powder. There's food grade, there's pool grade. You use it in the pool filter. So it's like a sand-like, powder-like substance that you sprinkle around. And it works by when insects crawl through it. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. It cuts their exoskeleton. It makes them desiccate and dry out. And so that's how insects are killed. So basically any insect that does a whole lot of crawling through it, it will be affected in the same way. So it's not toxic, but it's actually a physical damage to the insect. But the thing about diatomaceous earth, using it in the land, as soon as it gets wet, either from dew or from irrigation or from rain, it's no longer effective because it clumps together, right? So you don't have all these nice individual sharp pieces that will cut the insect. It just clumps together into like a wet blob. So it's not effective. So generally, like, it's better to, if you have household pests, it works pretty well for some household pests inside because I assume you're dry in your house. But outside in the landscape, once it gets wet, it clumps together. So it's harder to use in that way.
I'm glad you answered that. I didn't know that one.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else, there was another one. I think you answered it in the cabbage moths about beneficial. Is there any beneficial insects against cabbage moth larvae specifically that you can purchase, or is it just kind of whatever nature does?
That you can purchase. I'm not sure about specifically for them that you can purchase. I mean, they're like lace bug eggs you can buy that they're generalized predators though. So I don't know specific to them, but there are those little wasps around that will attack them out in nature.
Okay. Because that's
and remember, there's like 3 different species of caterpillars that feed on cabbages, and we call them cabbage moths, but there's actually 3 different caterpillars, all different times of year,
Okay. All right. And
Sorry.
no, that's awesome. And I did have a question from Claudia. She had to leave and she wanted to know, is there an entomology book that you would recommend or that you like?
So I actually came into work tonight because I have spotty internet at home and I rely on my hotspot. I'm going to stop sharing. Should I stop sharing?
Doesn't matter. It's up to you.
Oh, you don't want to see me, Sue? No, I'm just kidding.
I can
If I
see you
figure out
fine.
how to stop sharing. Okay, I can't figure that out now. Sorry. Oops.
That's okay. There's a lot of questions coming up now too.
So
Anyhow.
here are the books we have at the diagnostic lab about, so this is like entomology and fungus. These are plant diseases. So it's hard to recommend a book. There's a lot of them out there.
Okay. And yeah, in the chat, there's a few things. Spotter and lanternfly, somebody's looking for.
You're going to have so one of the webinars in this series is going to be Paul Kurtz from the State Department of Ag here in New Jersey, and he's going to talk about spotted lanternflies and I think crazy worms. But so you're going to get a lot of information there. I mean, that's a hard thing to answer in, a few seconds. It's a whole topic.
And then squash vine borers. That was the big things that I saw.
Don't grow squash. No, I'm just kidding. I grow squash. So what I tried this year is we grew squash later because we actually didn't plant it until after 4th of July and we got plenty of zucchini. So if you can plant, if it's like zucchini or summer squash and you can plant it later, then you avoid when the females are flying. So you actually avoid when they're active. You can dust the base of the squash with, we didn't talk about particular chemicals or organic compounds or biorational products, but BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. You can dust like the bottoms of the plants where they would lay their eggs, but that has to be on there after every time it rains. You have to reapply it, and it has to be on there before the eggs hatch, before those larvae of the squash vine borer bore into the stems of the vines. Once they're in the stems of the vines, you can try vine surgery if you're so inclined. You can actually, if you like slice the stem along the stem length, like longitudinally, and kind of open it up and like try and take some of those larvae out and then pile it back up with soil. Sometimes the plant will like root up there. That's only if like your neighbor doesn't have enough zucchini to give you, but you can try it. Have done vine surgery. See it? I have too. I know there's other people out there.
Hey, Sabrina, there was one question about some bee houses built by Boy Scouts on open space, and the person's asking if you can't clean them yearly, is it better to remove them or is it okay to let them stay out there?
So it's a good question. I don't know if the bees would, I don't know enough about like the houses for bees that you can buy, but I know you're going to have people from the Pollinator Society coming. So I think that's a good question for them. I don't know. I don't know if like the bees would clean them out themselves or if once they get used, they don't get reused. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. So I can't answer that one. I don't know if there's a fact sheet. I can look around, do some digging.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything else. Somebody mentioned crushed eggshells in the garden are good for deterring slugs and other bugs. Same idea with the scratching of the exoskeleton or the skin.
Yeah, but I don't know how effective it is.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it provides calcium to the soil, so that might be a good thing, but I don't know how effective it is really at insect control.
For the insects, yeah.
Yeah.
And
that was on the ground to stop hive bees on the ground. It's hard to stop. It's hard to stop them if it's bare ground or even if it's not bare ground. Like, I don't know if you're so much thinking hive bees or like yellow jackets. Those are ground nesting yellow jackets are, I said, those guys are just very aggressive. And I had them this year we had like a pile of, it was like basically a dirt and sod pile. We had moved some stuff around in the landscape and we had this pile and yellow jackets got in there. And didn't know, and then drove the little tractor next to it, and they're all coming out, and there wasn't just one exit hole out of the pile, there were like 3 or 4. So even when I tried to get, you should have seen me. I put on like the yellow Gordon's fisherman outfit. There were layers of sweatpants under that, and mind you, it's like July or something. It's 400 degrees even at night, and I'm out there like I covered my face, and because trying to control them at night, you don't want to do it during the day. You want it when they're in there and trying to not fly. But anyway, okay. Kind of the presentation on yellow jackets be scheduled for the future. I'm up for anything. That's all up to the people in charge.
We'll make a notation. Karen's going to be keeping the chats and everything, so we'll get some.
We can do one on like all just generally bees and wasps and yellow jackets, not in terms of pollinators and stuff, just in kind of their life cycle. It's pretty, I don't know. You see who I am. I like bugs. Seriously, I don't know how to stop my presentation. So we're just going to share my dogs with you. This is Ruby. She's like 14. This is Lily. This is Luna. They're both 9.
All right, I think that's about it for answering the question.
Okay.
Sabrina, I just want to thank you. It was awesome, and you should. I'm going to share the chat with you later somehow, and you've got to see all the great comments. And
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It was fun.
kudos. Yeah, I think every time we could listen to you 100 times and learn something new. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Super fun for
I
me.
will talk
Bye,
to
everyone.
Sabrina. We'll come up with something.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks to our Jersey Friendly Yards team here, Sue Servideo, Steve, Dr. Steve Urjo, and Christine Rave. We all work together on the Jersey Yard stuff, so thank you to them too. And if for anybody's still there, recording on the website tomorrow if you want to listen again and again and again.
Okay. And I will not listen. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks. I just want to save a couple things.